time and grief we go. Gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. So happy to be here today and welcoming you all into the month of April. April, we are going to highlight the topic anxiety. This is a big one. And we'll highlight a lot of facets of anxiety, its origin. Relationship anxiety is a big hot topic that we've been getting a lot of questions about. And of course, because we personally come from a grief lens, we'll probably talk a decent amount about anxiety in second chances and starting over, anxiety and grief, and just maybe some tools to help you tap into your nervous system and how we have found anti-anxiety measures. Honestly, to be fair, this is week 15 of pregnancy, and I have been having a lot more anxiety since I got pregnant than I would say my baseline when I'm not pregnant. And I attribute that to, well, lots of things, potentially a massive hormone shift in my body. It's been 10 years since I've been pregnant. I have been pretty steady Eddie on a Mirena, same birth control for 10 years. And I think the removal of my hormone contraceptive, along with that drop of estrogen and then a huge kickback up of progesterone and estrogen once we got pregnant right away. We got pregnant within the first, 30 days of removing the Mirena. Mm-hmm. And we're having big announcement. We're having a girl. So that's super exciting and kind of shocking. I definitely thought we would have a boy. My family, all the women tend to always procreate boys. And I remember when I was pregnant with Kate, I was super shocked. I think it was the first girl in my family of origin that had a girl. Everyone had boys. And so to have a girl again, I was definitely thinking that was not going to be the case. And I was excited that we were having a girl. But I always find that when you're pregnant with a girl, for those of you who may be experiencing pregnancy out there, it's a definitely different energetic vibe. You're a little more bitchy. I'm sure you wouldn't agree with that. A little more bitchy, a little less interested in sex, a lot more tired, a lot more anxious.
Anxiety is a very complicated, broad subject that it's going to be hard to cover. There's a medical side to it, which is kind of the DSM-5 anxiety, which I don't think is really what we're talking about, right?
Anxiety disorder, potentially. I mean,
that's the extreme that I think is easier to talk about because it's people can recognize, oh, well, I don't have that, or and it's more pronounced and more dramatic, so it's easier to kind of pick up. But I think what we want to talk about mainly is and I think you made a great point about the hormones, right? In a large degree, we're so disconnected with our bodies.
Mm-hmm, that's true.
That we tend to interpret a hormonal change or a change in the weather or all kinds of different external and internal stimuli as anxiety.
Right.
And I think that's probably one of the keys that we're going to get into talking to the alleviation of anxiety, in my opinion. And what I've learned working with Alix is that one of the most effective ways for me personally to alleviate anxiety is to get in touch with your body and actually listen to what your body's telling you. And then when you realize, well, I'm not anxious, I'm just hungry, or I'm not anxious, it's not generalized anxiety, I just have this specific issue, and your body kind of tells you the difference, in my opinion.
I would say that yes and no to what he said. DSM, so if you're suffering from an anxiety disorder, which is, I think a lot of people are undiagnosed in terms of this. I think a lot of people jump into depression, and depression and anxiety are, let's just say they're like brother and sister, right? They grew up in the same house, they really sit next to each other. Often you may have both if it's hard to separate what is what. What I would describe anxiety as in the DSM would be when you're not able to function on a daily basis due to anxiety. So your anxiety is collapsing you from operating your daily life. And if that's happening on frequent occasion, it's best to seek out a medical provider. And let me be clear by saying this. One of the things that I am going to say, and this is just a gentle piece of advice, is of course seek medical care. And I respect physicians across the board, but I have, my entire house is anxious. My entire house is anxious. We do not have one person living under this roof that is not suffering from anxiety. And I'm not going to say we're all in the DSM, but I would say with our PTSD or CPTSD, it's a hard one to say, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is long range, lots of trauma in our house. Everyone is dysregulated. Dysregulation means often we feel anxious in our body, right? So my family tends to drive to anger and anxiety, and that is, for the most part, everybody's baseline, with the exception of a few of our kids. And David and myself, I think we can tend to dissociate, which means compartmentalize or get away from what we feel on the inside of our body. David is correct. Embodiment is crucial when you're feeling anxiety, okay? So in order to feel, heal, and work through any dysregulating emotions, so emotions that take you so far away from, let's say, your center of gravity, your equilibrium, as they say in the medical world, or, where you can feel safe enough, as they say in the polyvagal lens, you have to actually be aware, right? You have to sit and feel it. And so embodiment means being in your body and actually feeling the feelings that are coming up. So that's a big step for most of us out there. I think the majority, myself included, when I talk about my previous life and sleepwalking means you kind of are on autopilot. You're hitting task to task to task to task to task. You might go through your entire day and not pay attention of your bodily symptoms, your physical self, your container, right? So you're like, as in the medical world, right, we can both contest to this. I used to pride myself on working with patients and seeing 60 patients a day, and I'd be like, I didn't pee all day. Like, I didn't go to the bathroom all day. I didn't go to the bathroom all day because I was dehydrated. I wasn't drinking enough water. I wasn't stopping to pay attention to myself. And if I did have to pee, I would ignore it and push through because it was more important for me to, stay outside of my body and in the world around me. That can happen at work, right? On a general, especially if you work in patient care, it can be sometimes acute problems and stress that happens, like an onset of a major thing where you have to be outside of yourself, right? You jump into action. It's not a surprise that David and I are excellent at that because both of us grew up in homes that we were required to get on autopilot and to be a certain way in order to be safe. So a lot of what we want to talk about is the origin of anxiety can come from caregivers, early childhood. It's a nervous system response. It is a good nervous system response. You need to have anxiety. It's actually a helpful response to keep you from danger, right? So the origin of your brain and your body and your nervous system is that we send adrenaline and cortisol and all these stress hormones flood up to tell you, hey, ding, 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 there's a problem. You're not safe here, or something's not right and you need to make a change. You need to change yourself, change your environment. Or we've learned there's lots of coping strategies in the humanistic world, in the mammalian world that we live in, which is shape-shift yourself and create a survival pattern to get out of emotional dysregulation and lack of safety. And so this is where the origin of anxiety happens. So our heart rate increases, our breathing, our respiration increases, right? Your HRV, heart rate variability, will change where we are not taking in as much air. We're more exhaling, less inhaling, right? and we're not regulated. Our heart rate is racing. We're sweating. We're a little diaphoretic. These are the symptoms. Our stomach may feel acute pain because when we get in anxiety, fight or flight state, blood rushes away from our gut towards the other organs in our body, right? We're trying to get ready to run or to fight. And those are really the physical that's like the reptilian side of our human existence, right? Since we were reptiles before we evolved, we needed to run or eventually fight to get out of danger.
Yeah, I mean, we see this in nature all the time.
Yeah, so we are of nature.
Yeah.
We forget that, right? Because we became walking around the world brains.
Yeah, I mean, for those of us, probably zero of our demographic are hunters. But that's okay. I am a hunter, and
David is a hunter.
It's turkey season, and turkey are probably one of the most anxious creatures that I've ever been around. And I have seen them be walking around and all of a sudden look over at a stump, just a stump, and then spook.
Right.
And
adrenal glands are functioning
they're literally on high alert, high anxiety all the time, and that helps them survive in nature, right? Because there are so many predators trying to eat them. And
they can't fly, really.
Eat their babies, eat their eggs. So they're in this constant state of high alert and anxiety, and you'll watch them spook like a squirrel. A squirrel will run up, they're gone. It's kind of, we laugh about it, but in our lives, that's less adaptable, right? We live in a civilized society. Hopefully our listeners are in civilized society. And those instincts can be non-adaptive, to where you're so anxious all the time that you can't get what you want done, or you can't have the relationships that you want, or you can't. A classic one for me is talking to my children. You're so anxious that they're going to tell you something that's not okay. I know this goes back to like Kate and I's podcast, but that you can't interact with them because you're anxious that
you avoid listening to how they really feel.
Right. So you avoid, and that like the fact that Alix can listen to my anxieties and kind of just listen, and then
I can't say that they don't activate me. I want to go back to the DSM. So if you're out there suffering and you're really debilitated and you can't seem to get over it, and you're avoiding work, you're avoiding social situations, you're avoiding maybe even familial talks all the way around, or parenting, because you're so afraid, I think it's really important that you seek out the right medical care. Again, I was saying all the people in our house deal with anxiety, and I've watched how, and no hating on primary care, there's some amazing ones out there who treat a lot of general issues and a lot of problems that people face on a day-to-day basis, but it's a major difference from when my children are being treated they go to a medical psychiatrist, and he is extremely educated in pharmacology and in the mixture of those medications and how they affect the brain, and he really understands how to read the DSM and do a buccal swab to do the genomide testing, which is a genetic testing which lets you know what is going to metabolize properly with your chemistry. That's a newer technology, and so I highly recommend that when you're dealing with anxiety, depression. These are really complicated things to be battling, right? Because if you're an anxious person that's got general anxiety that's not maybe on the spectrum where you might need to be medicated, you might just not be sleeping, right? You may not be sleeping at all, and therefore the lack of sleep is then causing more anxiety. And we are in a feedback loop all the time in our body, from body to brain. And so there's so many facets: diet, exercise, sleeping, hydration, right? So many things that
that's right.
chemically can impact that.
In general, medical anxiety, or GAD, general anxiety disorder, won't respond to any of those issues. So any of those things. I think that's really where the difference is, that although the DSM-4 gives you 5 gives you specific criteria that categorize you as general anxiety disorder. In other words, you can't function, it inhibits your normal daily activity, you can't eat, you can't drive, you can't
leave your house.
All those normal, you can't have any social interactions. That is a whole other category that generally...
Right. We're going to leave that off the table, but my advice to you and David's advice to you is get help from a psychiatrist, a trusted, I like medical psychiatrists. They went to medical school and psychiatric. They got a lot of pharmacology. They have a lot of experience. They also usually know how to understand talk therapy along with the medication, so they do both. And that is important, that they're actually checking in on emotionality alongside the medications that you're
And I think also
managing.
true GAD or panic disorder is relatively rare, whereas what we're talking about, which is kind of daily or bi-daily or every other day or weekly dysregulation where you feel fight or flight or you feel some mild panic.
I think almost everyone's walking around with
this. So common. In fact, it's maybe ubiquitous. I don't know. I mean, maybe everybody has it.
I literally don't think I meet people who are not anxious.
I do too.
I've never met anyone
We're
who's not.
seeing a subset of people, right, with this podcast and with the people we interact with. So maybe there are some fully regulated people out there, but I kind of doubt it.
Well,
I think that
regulation actually doesn't mean you're not having anxiety. Reminder, regulating your body or being regulated or resiliency, all of those terms that are under the window of tolerance and polyvagal theory are talking about when your nervous system is regulated. It just means that when you go into dysregulation, when you get anxious, it doesn't take you 3 days to get out of it, right? You know exactly what you need to do. It takes you a minute. You still have to use your tools. You've got a basket full of tools that you're going to grab and you're going to downregulate as soon as you can, right? And in all the ways you can. And sometimes for me, with a history of a lot of anxiety, yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of the diagnosis of Carl. I always find that April Fool's is like the shittiest day possible, and it's one of those holidays that gets me activated. Yesterday was probably the first year in 10 years that I haven't been totally dysregulated. I made a conscious choice this year that I was not going to attach to the PTSD memories. I was going to uncouple them. So when the day would come up, I would find a way to honor or do something in memorial of Carl and his suffering without flooding my memory with. And it wasn't perfect yesterday. I still did have like the thought that this was the time we were getting diagnosed. This is the time I was having a panic attack. This is the time that like those little thoughts were running. And the minute they came in my head, I like changed my thought pattern. So I was really trying to repattern my thinking and anxiety so that I didn't go down what I like always go down, which is this PTSD trail that takes me down like a linear path of like diagnosis day to the next day to the next day to finding out we couldn't have any more children to radiation to clinical trial was offered day one, like this crazy trail. And it will just take me down to where I sort of, and I think sort of for David as like maybe the day that Betsy had her brain aneurysm in the car, it happened so fast. The ground was being pulled out from under him. He can have these anxious recreations of the visuals in his head, the PTSD memories. And I had that for that day because that was the day where I was like, the ground was literally pulled out from under me and I had a lot of anxiety. And I think since then, actually, and even before then, my whole life I've been definitely anxious.
Yeah.
I've always had to be so anxious and aware. There was a lot of eggshells in my house, meaning like I was always on eggshells trying to figure out how to not tip the scale of emotionality from my caregivers.
Yeah, I think a lot of houses are basically homes of anxiety. Mine certainly was. In fact, in a lot of ways, anxiety, worry, concern, that's the term that people put on it, healthy concern. That was upheld as an ideal. Like if you didn't have anxiety about your kid getting his hand caught in the spokes of his bicycle or anxiety of them eating the wrong foods or whatever, then that was considered kind of bad parenting and you were irresponsible. And I think
neglect.
Neglect. I think there is some natural, normal concern for your children in your home, and then there's like the extreme. And I think in my house, we always were worried about the worst case scenario all the time. Well, don't do this because this could happen. The thing that happens like 0.001% while doing that activity, that was the reason not to do it. And it really, if you take that to the extreme, it really kind of shuts you down into we shouldn't let our kids use the telephone because then that'll take away from their school, and then grades will come down, and then they won't be able to get into college, and then they can't get into the right college, and they won't be able to go to medical school or professional school, and if they don't get into professional school, then they won't be able to have a successful career. And if you don't have, all of a sudden you're like, okay, the kids don't get to use the phone.
Right. No friends, no talking on the phone,
and
no social life.
We can't let them watch TV because there's stuff on TV that we don't agree with, and then if they hear something that is disturbing or maybe not quite in line with our beliefs, then that could start to make them question, and then if they start to question, then they might try drugs or alcohol, as teenagers.
Well, that sounds like a combination between extreme anxiety but also control.
Control, yeah. But it's a
control is a reactionary behavior of anxiety.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of homes, grew up with it like that. I would say the opposite in mine.
I can go on and on, by the way.
I could literally experience anything in my house. I think my parents were actually really good about freedom. It was the opposite. We had 6 children. I was 5th of 6, so by the time I came along, that's hard to manage, and I can really relate with 5 children in our home. There's only 2 of us, and we both work, and then getting to everyone can be challenging.
Like in that setting where you're basically kind of on your own, and you're anxious because you're on your own, is a very healthy, normal coping mechanism for a kid, right? So you're having to make sure you're safe, and that leads to your own personal anxiety.
Well, see, we're in the opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, we grew up in very different homes in that way, right? So he thinks that complete, letting everyone figure it out is really the best way, because he didn't have that growing up. And I actually find that's not accurate, right? Like, that feels accurate to him because it's the opposite of what he was allowed to do as a child. His parents were always around. They were very, very, very hands-on, to the point where they were, right? You've told me this, so I'm only using your words, but I should probably let you do the talking, but you really didn't have any freedom at all. And in fact, suppression would be the word you've used.
My parents didn't see it that way. And
safety is what they thought.
The only reason that I saw it that way later was when I started to interact with the outside world and realized, oh wait, there's people that can do things and they're okay.
Right.
What we were allowed to do was very controlled and very safe, and
mine was different. Like, we were very free to do anything. For the most part. I mean, we had boundaries to some degree. Like, if I, for instance, underage drink, that was a big no-no, and that happened a decent amount in my high school years. I had so much freedom, I think, that I started to act out because that was the time I would get attention. I'm not sure that I was conscious of that. I think it was a subconscious thing. But yeah, I think my anxiety was not surrounding me keeping myself safe. It was like, if I need someone, are they there kind of anxiety. I'm alone kind of anxiety. Right. I need to take care of myself kind of anxiety. There was kind of a deep fear of failure, because it was as though maybe it didn't matter if I failed or succeeded, and therefore I had no gauge of what was successful and what was not. It didn't really matter if I, didn't get great grades, or if I did get great grades. There was no real response emotionally either way. Not a lot of good job. And so I always felt very anxious that I was going to fail. In some ways, interestingly enough, the only attention in my home, and this is just I think the way that it happened with my combination between my father overworking and my mother's depression, but also too many children, or a lot of children, not too many children, that's a rude thing to say. They chose their amount of children, and I'm happy that we have all of the siblings that I do, but it was more fend for yourself. There's a lot of us, and only so many energetic moments to give. And it just always felt like it didn't really matter what I did. And that provided weird amounts of anxiety for me. And then I was always anxious a little bit with my mom's depression, that if I didn't do things to help her, that it would make her worse. And I was just really afraid
that
she would die.
Actually goes back to last month. There can be significant anxiety tied with people pleasing. For sure.
Right.
If you're,
That's a big problem of mine.
If you're constantly trying to
keep people happy.
Right, to keep people happy, that is a huge source of anxiety. It has been for me since I had children and before.
I think what we're really trying to say, so if you're suffering from any kind of anxiety, so right, people pleasing, abandonment anxiety, alone, not good enoughness, like there's so many versions of anxiety, right? Performance anxiety, perfectionism, which is another version, I think, of people pleasing. All of this comes back to embodiment, which David said, which the true embodiment practice, or the true way to gauge how to get yourself on the opposite, away from anxiety, or less anxious, I'll say, is to find sources of safety. Safety is a really weird word, because I think in society, safety means like someone's not trying to stab you, break into your car, break into your house. That's not really accurate. Okay, so inside
I mean, that's a part of it. I mean,
it is, right? That's why our nervous system was created as like the reptilian side of things, is to actually physically keep yourself safe. And sometimes we do physically have to keep ourselves safe. And there's a lot of people who are really just don't even have safety at all. And like the marginalized community, and like people that we don't really, we haven't really discussed necessarily. It's like, okay, well, if in order to stop feeling anxious and to be able to connect and be awake, you have to have safety. I mean, there's a lot of communities out there who are suffering so deeply that, like, how the hell are they going to get to safety? And like, we talk about this a lot in my EMDR class, in my trauma and somatics class, where it's like, yeah, okay, well, we really have to look at the communities that we're trying to help and heal. Like, when you're talking about domestic violence, where someone's beating someone's ass every day and suffering and suppressing all their resources, and they don't have a college degree or a high school degree, and they don't have their own bank account, and they don't have resources, and they don't have family because they came from a family who also came from a lineage of domestic violence. Safety looks very different in that situation than potentially what I'm saying. And I'm aware of my white privilege in this moment, in that I'm talking about safety like, oh, take a minute and meditate. Like, so there's a scale of safety, and we have to look at where we are in our world. And safety may look different from person to person. Like, safety may be actual physical safety, where today I'm going to talk about emotional safety. I'm going to talk about, anyone who's in domestic violence situations. By the way, we will put in some resources, because there actually is some really great resources out there to help get safe, especially here in the San Antonio area. Transformation House locally is an amazing, amazing organization that I'm just became familiar with and stalking and trying to work with, because they're fantastic. They really, really help in that situation. But that's, again, we're gonna take out the severity model, because those require so many levels of interaction. They require a lot of social working and lots of different people to come in different modalities to help that are outside of my scope of practice, truthfully. Right?
Yeah.
However, all people, whether you're in a non-safe community physically or emotionally unsafe, like at your day job, have the same baseline nervous system dysregulation. It's the same physical manifestation of the anxiety. And what I want to talk about in terms of safety is you have to find safety in order to calm down. What does that look like in relationships? What do you think? Because it's a big one. This is the real questions that we've been getting is, okay, when does a relationship anxiety, when is it normal, and when is it red flag, domestic violence? Like, when do we say, ooh, gotta get out of here?
I mean, the first thing that popped in my mind is communication. Because I think that our minds, particularly since we seem to be prone to anxiety, our quiet mind goes immediately to the worst case scenario, and to she doesn't love me, he doesn't love me, or worse. And that, without communication, that just grows and builds, and it's always in the back of your mind, and it can eat you from the inside out, those kind of negative and questioning thoughts, if you don't let them have air. So I think without communication, anxiety is not necessarily present, but it's worse.
Okay, so let's break that down for the listeners. What does communication mean? In my opinion, and when I'm working with coaching clients, I had a recent coaching client who, man, she's got a lot going on, and she's incredibly brave. So much anxiety. so much anxiety, and almost all of my coaching clients have a lot of anxiety, and as do I, right? So we have a lot going on. When we say to communicate, what does that mean? Well, it means talking about our fears, talking about what's making us anxious. And sometimes there's like all emotions, right? There's layers. There's the fear. I find that fear is always hiding underneath anger. Maybe even fawning. Fawning means when we change ourselves to make things better. So people pleasing, as we talked about last month, and anger, it can be both, but I find it's really easy to be pissed off when you're afraid, and it's really easy to be making things better, helping, you're constantly moving to make and control, right? All of those kind of dynamics. So it kind of goes one or two ways, right? And underneath those two subsets, where we're either going to people please or we're going to be mad at somebody. So those are the reactionary behaviors. Beneath those layers are sadness and fear. Sadness and fear are best friends. They sit right next to each other. You have both probably at the same time. Sadness is the harder layer to get to. Mm-hmm. Fear usually above that, if we were going down a path or down a ladder, right? And so communication means that we're going to sit for a hot minute, and when I'm pissed, really pissed, and when I get to the places, anger definitely would be my prominent go-to emotion. It always has been. I'll say this over and over again. I'm learning that I think I grew up in a male-dominated energy, so masculine energy in my home, and I think it was acceptable to be angry in my home. It was unacceptable to say that we were sad or afraid, or actually, I don't know that I had the space. I can't say that my parents couldn't receive it. My mom was very good at receiving emotionality to some degree, but it would overwhelm her if we were to tell her something that she and my father were doing was making me feel sad, making me feel afraid. And even to this day, if I translate her, my fears, that are in relation to my familial upbringing or my childhood wounds, it still can overwhelm her, which it does to me when my children tell me the same. It's not easy to listen to your kids telling you, hey, this was hard for me, this hurt me when you did this. But communicating that, I think, is vital in order for me to be transparent, vulnerable, and get to safety. Sometimes I actually have to say, what is making me afraid? Mm-hmm. What is making me angry? What is making me need to change who I am and please other people? What am I afraid? If I don't make this better for you, if I don't control this situation, if I don't people please and make you love me, what am I afraid of? Well, I can tell you my fears are always about the same three things. I'm afraid I'm going to be left. I'm disposable. I'm secondary to things that are more. Something is always more important than me. That I'm not good enough, and that I'm unlovable. Those are my three fears, and they pop up over and over and over and over and over in everything from work to friendships to love life to parenting. Anywhere out in the world that I'm walking around, deep inside of me, those are some messages that I received at a very, very, very primal age that I keep having to work against. I'm now conscious of those messages, and that is what causes all of my anxiety. Anxiety is right, and sadness is sitting in those because it's so sad to me that I feel that I'm not worthy. It's a shame. It's all kind of a shame circle, right? And a shame is just a rupture with no repair. Rupture meaning something broke and you got this bad feeling about yourself and you never got to fix it. No one ever made you feel that isn't true. So when we feel shame around our anxiety, our fears, and our sadness, we actually have to fix it, right? At a certain point, our caregivers, they did what they did. They did the best they could with the tools they had, I promise you. And it may have been totally shitty, and it may have been okay. But you could have the best childhood and still have these kind of shame and stories inside of you that whether or not they were true in your childhood, you have to make them untrue now. And the only way you make them untrue and you uncouple your stories, your shame, and your childhood beliefs is you have to uncouple the anxiety with it. Take it away. And you have to talk about it. He's saying you've got to communicate. He means you have to verbalize what you're feeling, but you have to have safety to do that. And what does that mean in relationship? How do you feel safe to tell me? Okay, tell me. Well, first of all, tell the listeners what are your scary inner voices? What are your childhood wounds?
Pretty similar. I worry about not being loved, not being noticed.
Yeah, that is a big one for you. Respected.
Respected, just acknowledged.
Yeah.
Those are the big ones, I think.
Yeah. And when you feel like someone is not noticing you and unlovable, how do you react? What is your surface emotion that you might present to the world in order to keep that buried inside?
Anger, for sure. And my instinct is just to push it down and be kind of angry, baseline angry.
So stay angry to push people away?
Just angry. I mean, the thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be. Well, it's very rarely the truth. That's the problem.
But the anxiety that you feel around these, because we're not necessarily talking about our childhood wounds and stories.
Well, you say in your brain, like I hear in my brain saying never. I say never a lot. You know, like if I tell the kids to do something and they don't listen, then I immediately hear in my head that
they're never going to respect me.
They're never going to hear me. They're never going to listen to me. They're never going to acknowledge that I'm here at all.
Yeah, he does that a lot. Well, and I found my therapist used to tell me all the time, like when you're feeling anxiety is the bodily response to the inner wound. Okay, let's just say that when we're talking about emotionality, the anxiety and the anger, the fight or the flight, get me out of here. I got to push this away. I want to run, or I'm gonna kill somebody. I'm so fucking furious.
Right, and
why can't you just hear me?
The thing is, you can develop behavior patterns, which I did for a long time, to avoid the entire equation. So, so I was aware that these things made me anxious, or I felt anxious, and I would get angry because I couldn't tell anybody that I was.
But you didn't communicate it.
I didn't communicate, and so I would just stay angry in anticipation of these feelings, and I just never left it.
And how did you get out of your cycle of anxiety? How did you relieve it? What was your previous coping strategies when you were in this?
I would busy myself, for sure, 100%. Just stay constantly busy. From the minute I woke up till the minute I put my head back on the pillow, it would never stop.
Yeah. Mine was a little different. Like, I definitely had reactionary. If someone challenged me in a way that would question my enoughness or made me feel unlovable, made me feel not good enough. So all those wounds we talked about, all my shame feelings, when someone triggered that or questioned that, I would react with anger.
Oh, yeah.
Anger that I couldn't settle down. And I always think about that, like, anger is normal, shame is normal. Everything we're talking about, you should feel all these feelings. You're not going to suppress the emotions. I still feel all of these feelings that I'm discussing. Even as I'm aware, they don't go away, and I actually don't need them to. What I do know now is that I know how to regulate them better and deal with them, and I know that they're coming from a wounded space, and I know that I need to almost like a baby self-soothe myself. Like, I've got to positive talk myself out of, it's okay. And I have a really cool teacher, Deb Dana, who talked about, another teacher, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, who talks about this, like, name it, right? You're gonna name the problem. So I'm feeling anxious. Normalize it. It's normal to feel anxiety.
Lots of people feel anxious.
Lots of people feel anxiety.
Right.
And then what's the third thing?
The correction. So it's the forgiveness. I'm
kind to yourself.
I'm gonna let myself feel this, and I'm not gonna let it inhibit my relationships, my work.
Right. Despite the anxiety I'm feeling, I'm going to give myself some kindness.
Right.
The opposite of what we want to do when we're anxious, and I'm going to continue to take a forward motion to whatever I need to do. I'm not going to let this block me from what I need to do to get what I want. So we practice this a lot because David gets anxious a lot, and so do I. But I've been practicing anxiety relief for a long time, but I still need it too. Like right now, I'm super anxious about like the most random things of parenting. It's the motherly vibe coming up. But so if you're at home and you're saying like, I'm anxious in my relationship, that if I tell my partner, what's a good one? What's something that we get anxious about that we're scared to tell each other?
That there's $500 left in the bank account. The checking account.
Yeah, so for those of you in the medical world out there, I think we're all in a crisis of hell right now. So if your payments are going through, what's it called? What's the company called?
It's a clearinghouse, basically. They got hacked.
They got hacked.
And so it's been down for over a month.
A month. So doctors are not being able to bill or receive any money.
Hospitals too. I mean, it's affected.
Hospitals, it's a major thing that's happening in the medical community, and it's highly impacting our home. So let's just say that we haven't collected any money from David's medical practice for over a month. And even though we're thankfully okay and have lots of stability, savings and whatnot, this is dysregulating. This is anxiety provoking to like the highest degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way. Like in the beginning of the month when you pay your rent or your mortgage and your
I've felt money anxiety my whole life.
And then you realize it's the 5th of the month and you have $250. That is definitely anxiety provoking for sure. I would have never shared that in my prior life, ever. I would have never told anybody, my wife, my children, that we needed to, just be a little more mindful about our spending for the rest of the month. I would have just buried it down, carried the anxiety, and been angry.
Mm-hmm. Angry because you're alone?
Yeah.
Not noticed?
Yeah, I mean, all those things. Yeah, that's right. Not even asked, just.
And that is interesting when I was single parenting.
And that's actually a major difference.
It's hard.
Now I am married to somebody now that in a lot of ways is more in tune with my feelings than I am. She's more aware of when I am upset, and basically she'll just ask me, why are you upset? And I'll almost always say, I'm not upset.
Well, for a couple weeks when this was going down, it was not quite affecting his practice as readily as it did others. It took a minute. However, he started to detach. So probably the 3 weeks and into gender reveal and into I just noticed every night he was really needing to scroll on his iPad for hours, and he's a busier. He went into patterns that I'm aware are his coping strategies are unhealthy. Can be sort of healthy, but unhealthy. Never stopped moving.
I actually think they're relatively healthy, and we talked about this
they're not drugs, but they're not healthy because he's not communicating. Exactly what we're saying here.
I tend to fix stuff.
He's staying anxious. He's compartmentalizing, and he fixes. One night, this is hysterical to the women out there. He's looking up, I don't even know what the word is, your light switches.
Wi-Fi switch.
Wi-Fi light switches. He was going to completely change out every switch in our house so that he can control it from the phone. And I was like, this dude's batshit crazy. First of all, he's already controlling our air conditioning all day long. I'm going to kill him. If he starts turning on and off lights, I'm going to lose it. And then secondary, that's a random thing. Our air conditionings are breaking. We have a kitchen renovation that has no cabinetry in it. Okay, we've got a lot more things to fix than the fucking light switches in our house. But that's where he went. He went into I'm gonna do this minute thing, and I'm gonna hyper focus on it, and I'm gonna dive so deep in the internet and do research on the best Wi-Fi light switch components I can purchase. And I'm gonna buy those, even though I'm scared about money, and then I'm gonna hyper focus on installing all of those. We live in a large house because we have a lot of children. And I can't even imagine the amount of hours that would take to wire all that in.
Quite a few.
Okay, so this was, and then I literally, that was my gasket. I allowed this disconnection to go down for about 2 weeks, knowing he was anxious about money, and knowing that was a real thing, because I've actually been a breadwinner, and I understand. I really understand. It's literally mind-consuming. And when you run a business, it's not just you and your paycheck. It's everyone that works for you's paycheck. It's everything. You maybe have got your line of credit, and that line of credit in his business can go in 5 seconds, even though it feels like it's a lot of money, gone. I mean, payroll, as everybody knows, if you run a business, is the most stressful thing. And just making payroll, when you do that, you feel like, you get anxiety every 2 weeks trying to do payroll or however you do your pay schedule.
Payroll is really interesting. I've never done payroll before. I've always been a part of a big group.
Oh, it's very
It is a fascinating exercise in anxiety, even when you have the money to cover payroll.
It feels anxious to let it go too, doesn't it?
No, I mean, I feel,
I always feel anxious to
and
let it
my
go.
staff has never said anything to me. They're super nice, but you just feel it's a weird responsibility. Like people trust you, and you don't want to let them. You don't want to let them down. In fact, you want to pay them. You want to give them bonus. You want to let them know how much you appreciate them. And it's just a lot of stress.
But there's only so much you can do because at the bottom, there's a bottom line, top line.
It's a reward too. Like it's great to be able to pay them, and they're happy when you pay them. And that's the kind of language of love in the business world, right? Is yes, you're doing a great job. This is your reward, and also it's just the verbal. You're doing a great job, but at the end of the day, they want to get paid because they have bills and anxieties.
What he's saying is it's a deep amount of pressure for the person that's in charge of running the financials.
That's right.
Because you, especially with his business, you don't always know what's coming in. Medical world's really weird, like 90-day delay in your payments. Insurance companies that say go to hell. Yeah. Even though this procedure costs you this much money, we're not going to pay you because we just don't think it's worth that much money. And so he could be upside down quickly in
We
procedures.
could also talk about the kids' grades. We talk about the kids in school. Like
but money is such an easy one because I don't know a single family out there that
doesn't have.
I don't care if you're a millionaire, multimillionaire, billionaire, like even people who are generational extreme wealth, they have anxiety in a different kind of capacity. It's like, how do I maintain relationships with all this money? Like I've read something interesting about a psychiatrist to the uber wealthy, like to the 1% wealth, like that they have all this anxiety about, like, are people genuine? People are always asking money of them. Like it's a different version than what we're talking about today, but it's still managing it, handling the right people to manage it because people take advantage of you.
So that's super interesting in that it is proof positive that if you think that satisfying the reason that you're anxious in that moment is going to make your anxiety go away, that is a falsehood.
Well, right. You get your payroll paid, your anxiety isn't going away.
No. So anxiety is like in its own separate little cage, and whatever you're doing or not doing, it is going to inundate everything that you do. You know
so
what I mean?
I believe sort of anxiety, and there's normal anxiety, right? So like, what's a normal anxiety? Let's say
Drowning.
Well, that's
Taking
not
steps
normal.
to not drown.
That's not normal. See what's going on here?
That's normal.
See, his family is on the far end of the scariest.
No, that's
Scary.
totally normal.
Normal would be like if you're in a play at school and you have to memorize your lines and you get on stage and you have anxiety, like, I gotta pee. That's your bodily response. Oh, I'm gonna pee my pants. And then I gotta get out there. You're excited. This is activated. You're in your body's like, let's go. We're gonna run a race. We're about to run a 5K. That anxiety you feel at the start line, that's a healthy anxiety, right? It's the giddy up and go that we all need to go to get out of bed and do our daily functioning. It's not drowning. I'm not sure what the hell he's talking. I love you. I hardly ever correct you in that way, but that was very off base. It's not preventing drowning. That's a different kind of anxiety. That's actually like the anxiety I think your family deals with, which is not, that's fabricated. Like, yes, you don't want to go like in the current, in the red flag. I mean, yes, but like, you shouldn't be worrying about drowning. Like, that's too much.
What I meant was, I meant the satisfaction of avoiding that anxiety. Like, you're getting in a boat, the water's rough, you're anxious about drowning, you put on a life jacket.
Right. So taking protective measures. Okay.
Right.
Maybe I misunderstood you.
That's what I meant.
Sometimes he goes to the far end of the spectrum, and I'm always like, I love him, but I'm always trying to be like, let's breathe. Like and this is the beautiful part of people who are super anxious. These are like your fucking Eagle Scouts out there. Like, he is always prepared. He is, I mean, like if he's driving a boat, we're safe. He flies planes. When he's flying, I feel very safe. I know that no matter what, he is not going to put us in danger.
I used to tell...
That's a trust in relationship. Like, can you say that about your partner? I can't say that I always felt like that with Carl. That's a hard thing to admit out loud, but I can't say I always felt like that. And I don't know, how did you feel in your first marriage? Did you always feel like you trusted that if you were, something was wrong, that Betsy would have your back?
No.
Right, okay, but let me take blame for my portion of that. I don't think that I ever could tell Carl what I was afraid of. I didn't communicate my fear because I thought if I said my shame words or my inner voice or your childhood wounds, as a lot of people call them, that he might not love me if I admitted those out loud. Like, I feel unlovable. I feel like you're going to leave me.
Yeah, so I felt that way as well. I felt that if I tried to share my anxiety or share my concerns, that would be an immediate turnoff, and that she wouldn't be attracted to me and wouldn't love me. And in fact, I think a
lot of men feel that way.
And sometimes the few times that I did try that, it did kind of feel like that.
Well, I actually have talked to a lot of women at retreat who do say that it is really scary when their husbands, so they don't understand why they can't connect with their partner. They don't understand why they always are locked up. They emotionally want them to be more connected, more intimate, more vulnerable, but
right.
Here's the back end of that. When their husband tells them, hey, holy shit, this clearinghouse hasn't paid me for 6 weeks. We're renovating our house. You have all these bills. I'm going to need you to pay for blah, blah, blah. Or like, you need to tighten up so much that we need to like literally bare minimum right now. That will send them, like these specific women, into a tailspin. And they're a little bit angry. Why can't you just handle this? Because I do think there is this fear of, okay, well, I'm afraid if he doesn't provide or whatever, like,
oh, there's no.
I don't know. I'm not really sure always what the undercurrent of that fear is for the people to hear the anxiety that comes out of their husbands or their partners. But the minute that they respond with disdain, right? Remember, we already said this. Their anxiety is, oh shit, we're not going to have enough money to live. I may have to completely do A, B, and C. A lot of times for women, it can be like whatever your station of work is, or whatever your, we balance, just like men do, a lot. And sometimes as caregivers, if you have children, and you might work a little bit, like, it is really hard to do both, to be a provider and to be a mother. Like, it is really hard to do both. I have done both. I've done all the roles in terms of this, so I feel like a good gauge on what it feels like to be all of it. And it's really scary. It's really scary to be alone in that.
Yeah, Betsy, in so many words, told me that fairly routinely. She would tell me that I was her rock. She said that all the time.
Yeah, you've said that in the podcast a few times.
You are my rock. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I am the river, and you're the solid thing that I can hold on to.
Well, it sounds kind of sweet.
And it was sweet. And at the time, I thought, wow, fuck yeah, I am the rock. Yeah, it felt good. And then, but the truth is, it puts you in a box, right? It's basically telling you, I need you to not be anxious, and if you are anxious, don't share it with me. I need you to not have any unsurety, and if you are unsure, don't tell me about it.
Well, the truth is, we can't be rocks or rivers all the time.
No.
In couples, in partnership, in relationship, in friendship, in all the things, if we're being honest, in familiar relationships, we have to, we are all of it. Like, that's the thing about emotions. It's a spectrum. We feel everything all the time. And if we want our partners to share, in deep intimacy with us, or get closer and know the true self, we actually have to accept that there's not a human in the world. And in fact, I think it really sucks that men are put in this position to be rocks.
Yeah.
And it's cracking. Like, the seams are cracking for men being rocks. You can feel it. It's happening. Like, men are like, go to hell. We can't do this anymore because we're killing ourselves. Like, we're killing ourselves.
Well, and some of that may be a measure of having more women in the workplace, frankly.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.